Hey everybody, Matt here with an update for you on Hurricane Lee. Lee's still a very powerful storm, 115 mile an hour maximum sustained winds. But one thing you might be able to notice here on the map from the National Hurricane Center is the size of Lee's wind field. It's grown pretty significantly in the last couple days. We're now talking about tropical storm force winds extending out almost 250 miles from the center. This is a big storm size-wise, and it's probably only going to get bigger as it comes to the north. This is a little problematic because, number one, we have to worry about the impacts from Lee based on the track, and particularly as it relates to storm surge. The strongest and most significant surge will go to the right of where the center comes ashore from Lee. But the other aspect of this is that with Lee being as big as it is, impacts are going to extend far from the center of the storm. So for a lot of folks, the center of the storm's track doesn't matter. And in fact, you will see strong winds regardless of where Lee comes ashore. So that's kind of two things that we're watching. And then the third thing, of course, is rain, as you always have to watch during these things. And we'll talk more about that in a second. And of course, rough surf, beach erosion, the works. You're just going to be dealing with a lot of issues here in New England. New England and Atlantic Canada, I should say. One point I really want to make clear. You're going to hear over the next couple of days that Lee is weakening, and it will. It will lose its maximum intensity. It will not be a major hurricane when it gets to New England. However, Lee is going to remain a formidable storm, and the phrase I've been using today is it's going to be able to punch above its weight class. In other words, just because it's a tropical storm or a Category 1 hurricane, it's actually going to be bringing impacts that are a level above that. We've seen that in the past with certain storms. Hurricane Ike in Texas is a good example. Came ashore as only a Category 2, but it had a storm surge that was worthy of a Category 4 type hurricane, which caused significant damage. Hurricane Sandy a couple years ago, barely a hurricane when it came into the Jersey Shore, but it had a storm surge because it was so large in size. Its storm surge was probably the equivalent of a Category 2 or 3 hurricane. So we get storms like this, and a lot of times they can happen in the Northeast as they're transitioning from tropical systems to what we call extratropical systems, basically from hurricanes to nor'easters is kind of how I like to think of it. So as Lee comes to the north and it makes that transition, it's already got a big wind field. It's only going to get bigger. That's going to lead to some significant problems. So folks in New England, coastal New England, as well as coastal Atlantic Canada, Prince Edward Island, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and even Newfoundland probably should continue to watch this. Again, the size of Lee will create impacts far away from the center of the storm. Let's talk more about rainfall tonight and what that could mean for the storm. All right, so I've got two maps here. The map on the left is from the European model, the operational European model. I know I like to talk a lot about don't use operational models, but they can give you hints as to certain things. And now we have kind of two distinct camps, the operational and the ensemble, the European and the GFS model. First, the European model on the left. You can see this is forecast rainfall. Anywhere you see the red color, generally thinking about 1 to 3, 2 to 4 inches of rain. Wherever you see the brown color right here in coastal Maine, that's sort of along the lines of 4 to 6, 7, or 8 inches of rainfall from Lee. On the right here is the GFS model. This model takes Lee a little further to the east. It keeps its precipitation maximum a little further to the east. So the key difference between these two models is the GFS on the right takes Lee more into Nova Scotia, whereas the European model on the left takes Lee closer to Acadia National Park, Bar Harbor, and then eventually into New Brunswick. The difference there is not really significant in the grand scheme of things. It's only about 100 miles spread, but the difference in where the heaviest rainfall ends up is very important because of that. And you can see in the Europeans' case, it brings heavier rainfall to Maine. In the GFS's case, it brings heavier rainfall more offshore and closer to Nova Scotia. So the track of Lee will matter in terms of how much rainfall you see. It'll make a big difference in terms of how much rain you see. And I think that's kind of important because there has been some heavy rain in New England this week, particularly along the coast and particularly down into Massachusetts. That's where we've seen some heavy rain. So if this shifts any further to the west, we could be talking about some issues farther south down the New England coast, into Massachusetts, into Cape Cod, maybe even into Rhode Island. So we're going to have to watch this very closely over the next couple of days to see what the trends are. Now, the forecast from the GFS is supported by some other models, taking it into Nova Scotia, as well as some ensembles. But the forecast from the European model actually has the support of the HAAFs, the HAFS B model. It's a new hurricane model that we're using this year. It's been doing pretty well. It's supposed to be the next generation of hurricane models, and it has shown itself to be an admirable addition to our arsenal of model data. And so the European model and this HAFS model are in very good agreement with each other. And when I see that, I get a little concerned, because usually that indicates to me that there's something going on that they're seeing, because they have slightly better physics tuned into the model than the GFS does. So when they're seeing something like that, that tells me that there's not necessarily a red flag, but a flag that we have to watch, and that they could be onto something, bringing the storm kind of closer to New England than maybe Nova Scotia. Either way, if you live in Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, New Brunswick, Maine, Massachusetts, Cape Cod, Nantucket, you want to be prepared for this storm as if it's coming your way. You want to start those initial preparations now rather than waiting until the last minute. Let's look more at the ensembles and see if we can pick out any other trends in the forecast. Now, the cool thing about this graphic from Tomer Berg, a graduate student at the University of Oklahoma, is that you can see the different coloration here. The green color is the GFS ensembles, the red color are the European ensembles. And what you're getting is more of a picture as to where those biases are within those ensemble models, and see how there's more red to the left, more green to the right as you get up near the New England and Canadian coasts. And what that says is that the European model, more of its ensembles are leaning more toward a New England or Western Atlantic Canada hit, whereas the GFS ensemble is indicating more of a Nova Scotia type impact and maybe a little bit to the east there. That's important information for us to have at this point, because that tells us, all right, we've got kind of two plausible scenarios here. We're trying to narrow down exactly where the track's going to be, but we can now sort of hone in on, okay, are there trends in the European model that we can watch for over the next couple days, as well as a GFS model that'll give us a clue as to who is right and where the track of the storm may go? Or will it go more outside the bounds, closer to Massachusetts, or further east, closer to Newfoundland? So these are all things we're going to be watching over the next couple of days. I wish it were easier to say, hey, we know where it's going and what the impacts are going to be, but it's just not that. But I think the big story here is that wherever Lee comes ashore to the east of there's going to be a significant surge of water that comes in because of Lee's size. That's going to lead to a significant storm surge. So if Lee makes landfall in Massachusetts, hypothetically, you're talking about a significant storm surge all the way up through Maine, into Nova Scotia, into the Bay of Fundy, and maybe even as far east as Newfoundland. Could see some pretty substantial wave action and surge action as Lee comes ashore. It is that big in size, and it will be bigger when it gets up there. So the size of the storm is very, very important. And we can talk about categories and all this all day, but when you factor in the size of the storm and how big the wind field is, that tells you more about what the damage capabilities of a storm are. And in that instance, Lee is moving its way up the scale rather than weakening. And that's a very important delineation for folks in New England and Atlantic Canada. And that's why we're going to underscore that you need to take this seriously as we get a little bit closer. So as we get closer, we'll know more about surge impacts and things like that. But if you live on the coast, it's time to start thinking about hurricane plans in Atlantic Canada and New England, because you don't want to be caught flat-footed here at the end of the week. We've been talking about Lee for over a week now. I don't know how long it's been. It's been a long time. It's easy to get fatigued and tired of talking about it, but the reality is that Lee's coming, whether we want it to come or not, and it's going to create some impacts, and some of which could be significant and serious for parts of New England and Atlantic Canada. So we'll do our best to narrow things down as we get a little bit closer. Visit theiwall.com for our latest information. You can see these maps there as well and enlarge them and take a closer look at them yourselves if you go to the site. And we'll be back with another update for you tomorrow. Take care.